This is R.J. Rushdoony, easy chair number 44, May the 7th, 1983. And Chuck and John Saunders Quaid and I were sitting here telling stories while we were waiting for Chuck Wagoner to get the equipment set up. And I'll pass one of the stories on to you. We were discussing blunders, verbal blunders, and the starting point was one I made on one of these tapes which Chuck cut out. But I told them of an incident that happened some years ago, and I was a witness to it. It was a sad one, but it was amazing in its nature. It was in a very large Bay Area church. The pastor was a fine and kindly man, but he was walking a tightrope because two powerful families in the church were alternately displeased with him. Well, there was a wedding, and of all things, it was between the son of one family and the daughter of the other family. And neither family was happy with the wedding, and at that time, they were both angry with the pastor. So when the service began, everyone was tense, and he was walking a tightrope. The couple were the only people there who were really happy about the occasion. The pastor did beautifully until the conclusion of the service, when he declared, "Whom therefore God hath put asunder, let no man put together." There was a gasp, a shocked gasp all over. He tried to recuperate. He concluded with a benediction and left in some embarrassment. And he never lived that down, poor man. However, I'll tell you a story that I did not deal with before, which is the ultimate boner. And it couldn't have happened to a more deserving person. This was a pastor I really had no use for. He was young and very handsome, very much on the go, seeking his own advancement. And by the time he was in his early 30s, he was in a very wealthy congregation, magnificent stone church in the best neighborhood with an exceptionally good salary. He had everything. He had it made. And there was a large wedding taking place. And very important families. The church was not only thronged, but people were standing along the wall and in the back. And so before the service began, someone in the family requested that when the processional ended and the organ stopped playing, he asked everyone to be seated. Normally, in many churches, everyone remains standing for the service, which usually takes only about 20 to 30 minutes. So he agreed he would ask everyone to be seated. Well, the organ began to play. The bride and the groom came each from their respective directions. The organ stopped playing, and the pastor announced, "Will the congregation please be seated while the marriage is consummated?" When he said that, he turned red, and the congregation gasped, and then they began to laugh. They roared with laughter. They became hysterical with laughter. When the laughter died down, it began again in wave after wave after wave. And it was some time before the wedding was able to continue. Needless to say, the young man resigned and left.
Oh, that's terrible.
I think sometime I'll write a book on
Pastoral
boners I have known about. Well, now to get on with things today. John Saunders Quaid is with me because we're going to discuss something that Cal Seaton has planned for this October. A conference on the arts. And it's going to be an especially important conference. We're expecting a very large crowd so that when we send out announcements and you're interested in coming, let us know immediately, because this is going to reach a capacity audience. John, do you want to tell us about it?
Well, I think we've been establishing for some months now the basic position of Cal Seaton on the media and the arts, and we've been telling people that there's a lot of things that we have to do, and one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to bring expression to that. We didn't want to talk about it and write about it. We wanted to show exactly how to go about bringing Reconstruction into the media and the arts. The humanist has been using the media and the arts for many, many decades now as a tool of propaganda for his worldview, and we believe that the Christians have a better solution. The Bible's the final authority in every area of life, which includes art, and that art, insofar as a Christian is concerned, is not limited just to doing television programs about evangelism or prophecy or some Bible studies and things of that nature, which all have their place. But our primary concern is with attacking humanism in its stronghold, with bringing Christian artists to an epistemological self-consciousness, to an awareness of what they know and how that influences art. And we're bringing together a number of people from across the country, and not only yourself, but Frankie Schaefer will be there, myself, of course, and Paul Lyons, who's president of the American Business Media Council. Paul has been, for years, trying to get conservative businessmen to wake up to the fact that they're funding their own destruction in television and elsewhere. Otto Scott will be there also. We will have a number of paintings on exhibit, as well as quite a complement of literature on the arts. We will have, I think, altogether it's 11 speakers. Senator Bill Richardson will give the banquet address at the conclusion. We're expecting Dr. Cornelius Van Til to come out and be our special guest. I talked to him on the phone a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going back to see him on May 21st to finalize those arrangements. And we're expecting we're limiting the conference to about 350 people. And the reason for that is primarily the facilities, but also because of the fact that this is the first time we've ever done anything like this. And we're trying to limit the number of people we have to handle. But we're interested in doing things. For example, we want to show Christians how to apply the law to their business, how the artist applies the law to his business, and how he also uses that same law in his art, and how he develops characters and things of that nature on biblical models of character. We want to show the artist, for example, there's a major problem in copyright today and people getting paid for their work, for books and films and tape piracy and things. The Christian position has provided the answer to that problem many, many centuries ago, and we've lost that perspective. We want to deal with the historic greatness of Christian art as it was in the Reformation, which is your topic in the conference, and to give the Christian something to shoot at. So it's going to be a very, very broad-based perspective, concentrating primarily this time on television and the media arts, and secondarily on the other arts. We're expecting, as I said before, to take about 350 people. It'll be a 2-day conference. Registration on Friday the 14th from 9 until 12.
This is October.
October. And then we will have 4 hours of instruction and lecture on Friday, and then another 8 hours of instruction on Saturday, concluding with the banquet that night. And I think Martin Celebretis, who's giving a paper on the theory of Christian music, he is trying now to put together a concert, for a dinner concert for the guests, about 18 to 20 pieces to do some original compositions. And we're expecting it to be a full-fledged affair, and very excited about it.
Yes, let me add, Martin Celebretti is doing an important musical study
Yes.
on a Christian theory of music. He's not an amateur at it. He has had 26 compositions played by various symphony orchestras.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking forward to that aspect of our conference.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it sounds wonderful, and we'll keep all of our listeners and readers posted on this as time goes on. Is there anything else you want to add?
Well, we're interested in beginning to develop some other factors in the arts in terms of how do we bring the Chalcedon view, for example, the biblical Reconstruction view to the whole of arts. And one of the things that we're looking at in this area is various media projects, which we've talked about before.
Yes.
And those projects are coming along very slowly, but coming along very certainly in terms of the development of the concepts we're working with. We're talking with Chuck Wagner here about doing some more, expanding our radio effort, and various other things. The whole media and arts arm of Chalcedon and the Reconstructionist perspective is really, I think it's really beginning to lay a solid foundation for a major explosion here in the next year and a half, where Carolyn and Gwen and all the wives and things around here are, they're kind of lonely at times when we take off across the country, all of us, but they have so much to do here insofar as Chalcedon's work, and in particular in the arts and the media, that it's really provided a kind of unity this project has. It's brought us together to work on a particular project, and we've had a great deal of blessing as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Caroline Kelly and Gwen Saunders in particular have been doing a lot of the work on this October conference.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Anything further you want to add?
Not at the moment. I can only say that the invitations that are being mailed out to people, we do expect the conference to be full, as you said at the top of the show, or at the top of the tape, rather. We've already got something like 80-some applications and people that want to come to the conference and who've committed to come to the conference, and we haven't even sent out the flyers and registration forms yet. So, and we're limiting it to about 350. So
these are some of the media people themselves,
yes,
are they not?
Yes,
from Hollywood.
Yes, we've sent invitations to 2 or 3 producer friends of mine who want to come. One of whom is a producer of Happy Days, and to 2 or 3 writers who write for major television productions. And we have a number of technical people coming. For example, a director of photography, Roy H. Wagner, will be, who has an extensive knowledge of the history of film and how and why it's declined. He's also coming to the conference to deliver a paper. And there will be a number of people there who are indirectly related to the media insofar as producing is concerned. People who have television stations who are interested in funding television projects and media projects. We're very concerned with seeing that those people discover that there is a conservative Christian basis for the arts, and that and not only is it true, but it can also be very, very profitable.
Yes, let me add this. In the arts and media, we are lining up the personnel, the professionals with expertise. Now, all we need is someone to give us the funding, and we are ready to do some remarkable things, because there are people there in Hollywood, as John indicated, who are simply waiting for the right vehicle and who are unhappy that they are being given turkeys to produce and to market. Mm-hmm. They want the kind of thing that Chalcedon can deliver. Now we need the funding.
Just one thing, Rush. I got a letter from producer of one of the most successful situation comedies on television here a while back, and he's a Christian, very concerned about the declining morality and philosophical basis of television. But in this letter, he lists a running history of how he tried to mount 2 successive projects over a period of 3 years, which had a definite Christian foundation, and one of them was even about a Christian man, who was the very image of the Christian man that we talk about all the time, who was the leader of the home and the responsible, etc., and who even talked about God in the show. And he talked about the incredibly excruciating and frustrating problems he had with 99 different people trying to defuse possible uprisings in various quarters of the United States because of its obvious Christian content. And it isn't that there aren't people there who are not trying, because there are people there who are definitely trying to get this kind of product on the networks, but the networks are not buying it, and they're not buying it for a lot of reasons, all of which are of course fundamentally corrupt. But I just wanted to say that because I wanted to let people know that there are many individuals in the industry right now who are in major positions of power and expertise, but only in the production sense and not at the network level. And these people are trying to turn out the kind of product and trying to offer the kinds of pilots to the networks that we're talking about, but they're having absolutely no success whatsoever.
Yes. Let me add something there, something I hope one of these days to write a little article about. I'm increasingly weary of the efforts by Christians to clean up television. Because the thing that comes home to me is that what they're trying to do is fundamentally false. It's rotten. What they are saying is, we don't want pornography and we don't want sex and violence on television. We want to clean it up and give it a moral aspect. What for? All they're saying is, we want to make humanism palatable. We want to give a kind of a Christian veneer to humanistic programming. Well, I'm glad that TV is as bad as it is today, because it's humanism going to seed. Let people see what humanism adds up to. And let them say, we don't want humanism cleaned up, we want it replaced.
And I think one of the best biblical admonitions about this whole thing is, one does not put new wine into old wineskins.
Very good, exactly.
And I believe that the only reason why the humanistically controlled networks survive today is because the Christians haven't done anything. I believe it survives only because the conservatives, who are always talking about competition in a free marketplace, nevertheless arbitrarily exclude media and communication arts from that marketplace.
Yes.
And I believe that what's going to have to happen is that the conservatives and the Christians who have the funding, who have the financial clout, etc., are going to have to realize that they can't go to the opposition. The opposition will launder their money, as they always have. And that it's not to try to reform the networks, because that's just trying to put new wine into old wine skins. It's casting pearls before swine. And I think what we ought to do is, as we've said before in the journal and in previous takes, build the network from the ground up. The marketplace is there. The need in the marketplace is there. The audience research demonstrates this is the kind of product the audience wants. And I think that all we have to do is provide the alternative in the marketplace, and you can just cut the legs off of the major networks right at the knees. And I think that the art will be extremely successful, philosophically, theologically, religiously, and I think it'll also be extremely successful financially.
Yes. You know, one of the great evils of our time is not on the side of the humanists. It's on the side of the Christian community. Here we are clearly in the majority in this country, because according to all the polls, those who profess to believe the Bible from cover to cover number 55 to 60 million. On top of that, one recent poll indicated that over 90% of the people in this country declare that they believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Now, what are these people doing? They could be turning this country around if they were ready to put their money where their mouth is. Do you know that just since the first of the year, and I've been on the road so much, I was gone 3 days this past week. I will be gone 4 days this coming week, and every day the next week, and so on for a while. Just the people who come up to me wherever I've been and said how much they think of our work, and they can hardly wait for the Chalcedon report to come. And whatever they're doing, they drop it to read it immediately. If the people who said that to me, and I know because I look at all the material, the deposits, everything, were giving to Chalcedon, if they had given $10 or $20 since the first of the year, or last year, we'd be in a much stronger position financially and able to do some of the things we cannot do.
No question.
The Christian does not put his money where his mouth is. He'll complain about politics, but he'll never give to a political campaign.
Well, I think it's always easier to complain than it is to put forth a positive affirmation of what you believe in. Negative criticism is very, very easy. We're all very good at it, throwing rocks at other people's houses.
Yes.
But it's one thing, it's quite another matter to sit down and build your own house.
Yes, exactly. We get all kinds of letters from groups that want us to promote this or that cause, which is anti-something. Our primary concern is with building.
Yes.
Because I have seen millions spent on negation without accomplishing anything. We're only beginning to turn things around as some people have gone out there and worked hard to establish this or that agency, to go out and do grassroots political work, to start Christian schools, to start homes for delinquents, and so on. And a lot of people just sit back and insist that their calling is to criticize, and that's the essence of their religious duty. Well, now to go on to something else, I'm very grateful to John Lofton for having sent me an article in defense of the welfare state by George Will from the May 9, 1983 New Republic. It is a most remarkable essay, because I believe George Will has some kind of church affiliation. Certainly, there is no evidence of faith in this article, because the essence of his position, well, let me quote a few passages. But a free market economic system is a system. It is a public product, a creation of government. Any important structure of freedom is a structure, a complicated institutional and cultural context that government must nurture and sustain. Obviously, free speech is not free in the sense that it is free of prerequisites. It is not free of a complicated institutional frame. Free speech, as much as a highway system, is something government must establish and maintain, and so on and on. Now, for George Will, the state has replaced religion as the motivating force in life, and also as the overall environment of man. It has replaced God. So he is thoroughly in the tradition of the Greeks and of Hegel, who said the state is God walking on earth. If the state is the environment of man, as he says, if the state is the creator of all institutions, of all freedom, then indeed we have bypassed Christianity totally and moved into a radically pagan world. To give you examples of this kind of pagan thinking in Will, I quote, "If we are to be properly conscious of our politics, if our politics is to be properly conscious of itself, we must be wide awake to this fact, choosing an economic system, or choosing substantially to revive significant economic policies is a political, which means moral, undertaking, unquote. Notice the equation of the political and the moral. Now, this is Aristotle. Aristotle said that morality was something that came out of politics, a product of the state. This was Plato also. But we believe that God is the source of moral law. That if you do not derive your morality from God, the state will become God, or the individual man will become God. There is nothing in this article that would indicate that George Will ever did anything but walk through a church. It apparently never registered on him. In fact, he goes on to substantiate his point with regard to the welfare state in these words, and I quote, "A welfare state is certainly important to and probably indispensable to social cohesion, and hence to national strength. A welfare state is implied by conservative rhetoric. A welfare state can be an embodiment of a wholesome ethic of common provision." Again, you see the moral equation, a wholesome ethic of common provision. The doctrine underlying the political economy of the American welfare state was enunciated in 1877 by Chief Justice Waite in Munn versus Illinois. The court upheld an Illinois statute regulating rates in grain elevators, holding that private property, quote, becomes clothed with a public interest when used in a manner to make it of public consequence and affect the community at large. When, therefore, one devotes his property to a use in which the public has an interest, he, in effect, grants to the public an interest in that use and must submit to be controlled by the public for the common good to the extent of the interest he has thus created, unquote. Now, as one scholar has pointed out recently, this decision, Munn versus Illinois, destroyed private property, because there is no private property that cannot be said to, in some extent, have a consequence affecting the community at large, have a use in which the public has an interest. So, everything then becomes a matter of public interest, which the courts have so interpreted means a state interest. So not only does Will deny that religion is the source of morality, not only does he replace God with the state, but he has in effect assented to a tradition which has destroyed the significance of private property in this country. Moreover, he goes on to say subsequently that, and I quote, "The most important reason conservatives should give for their vision of the welfare state is the most important reason for doing anything politically. It is justice." And he goes on to define justice as something that is created and established by the social order, by the state. Well, justice means an ultimate right or wrong. It means righteousness. The two words are equivalent. And the only valid standard of justice or of righteousness can be God, none other. So that if you make the state the arbiter of justice, and if you justify its existence in terms of itself, you've taken away the possibility of allowing for any freedom. And of course, for Will, freedom is a product of the state. What George Will's article clearly reveals is that conservatism, if it is separated from Christianity, will become destructive.
I think essentially this is just a logical consequences of something we've been talking about for a long, long time at Chalcedon, in that as soon as you remove the foundation, it doesn't take very long for those who style themselves as conservatives to, in fact, become anti-conservative and liberal. I would also point out that George Will is considered by ABC in his appearances with David Brinkley and a number of others as their token conservative.
Yes,
because he appears on a good many of the standard talk interview where you have 3 or 4 newsmen interviewing somebody. He appears as the regular token conservative on ABC television, and they have used his perspective a great deal against the conservatives because the liberals know where Will is really coming from.
Yes, only the liberals will call him a conservative.
That's right.
Yes. Now, here's another item. The Reverend Robert H. Schuller, and I think most of you are familiar with him, is pastor of the Crystal Cathedral in Southern California. The church has been stripped of its tax-exempt status, and this was because they had what has been called commercial activity. They've had concerts by Lawrence Welk, Victor Borge, Fred Waring, and others, and a 12-concert season of spectaculars which brought Tony Bennett, Mitch Miller, and the Fifth Dimension to the church. Now, you and I may disagree about the value of their concert series, but the whole point of the state's argument against the church was that these were profit-making activities. Well, let's examine that a bit. The idea that a church cannot in any respect make money is ridiculous. The idea that the state has a right to tax profits is a very recent idea. Very, very recent. Not much older than a lot of people still living. And that has been a usurpation by the state. The medieval church had concerts. It had drama. It had all kinds of activities. It ministered to every social and cultural need. That has been the historic life of the church. The church very often loses money on much of what it does. But today the attitude of state and federal agencies is that if they make a little bit of money on anything, they must immediately be clobbered. Well, the whole premise is invalid. It means that we are losing our freedoms to the state, which today says we will tax profit-making activities, and which is also proposing that non-profit activities be regulated and is regulating them increasingly, so that what is left that is free from state controls? And what is wrong with the church making some money? Now, I may not agree, and I do not agree with Schuller's theology or with his concert program, but I believe he should have the right to have those things that he feels he wants to put on. It is a church. It has a ministry. It is meeting an important need in that community, and it's doing a number of things that I think are excellent. It's helping a great many people in need. I think if you were to balance the kind of expenditure the church makes where it is in effect giving away money for Christian community purposes against what it has taken in on its ticket sales for its concerts, the Crystal Cathedral has lost money. But of course, the state does not figure that way. I think it's very wrong. It needs to be challenged. Now to go on to something else, a very interesting book, Megatrends, M-E-G-A-T-R-E-N-D-S, 10 New Directions Transforming Our Lives, by John Naisbitt, Naisbitt. Came out just recently, $15.50 a copy, published by Warner Books, 1982. You can buy this by ordering it from Heritage Bookshop, 2427-B, Marconi Avenue, Sacramento, California, 95821. Now, Megatrends is written by a man who is not a conservative. He is simply trying to document the trends that are now in appearance that will determine the future. Let me say his book is far superior to the kind of thing that Alvin Toffler wrote. I thought Toffler's Future Shock and Third Wave were nonsense. But there's a great deal of important data in Megatrends. One of the things that mark it as a superior book is that it is written with discernment, with wisdom. For example, one of the observations he makes at the very beginning is especially astute. He says, and I quote, "Trends are bottom up, fads top down." That's very important for us to know, because today the world is very much dominated by fads, and it tends to look at the future and the present in terms of fads. And fads are from the top down, but the trends which govern the future are from the bottom up. And those trends are very important for us to know. Now, apart from acknowledging that there is a trend in the area of religion, which he goes over very lightly, Naisbitt does not do justice to the religious trends of our time, which I believe are exceedingly important. I think we are a part of those trends here at Cal Seton. Every day I recognize how much we are when somebody calls me and tells me that in some periodical or other, someone is taking another swipe at us as some kind of growing menace in society.
It's good publicity, Rush.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Now, one of the points Naisbitt makes is, and I quote, "The new source of power is not money in the hands of the few, but information in the hands of many," unquote. So that we have a tremendous growth today in information, in trends, in the growth of small business, in new sources of vitality, energy, and power. We're seeing the destruction of old forms, the old education, among other things. Naisbitt comments, "We are drowning in information but starved for knowledge," unquote. An excellent statement. He deals also with what's happening in medicine, with the entrepreneurial explosion. He calls attention to a fact that Drucker has commented about, that nobody really believes anymore that government delivers. Moreover, he calls attention to the kind of thing that's developing, something I called attention to a while back. And he cites the fact of gleaners in Northern California harvesting the crops, the apples, and so on, and points out that there are gleaners in Arizona, Michigan, Oregon, and Washington states as well. This kind of thing that's taking place all over the country. So that he says we are developing a different kind of country, one that is very much different from what we today are familiar with. It's an important book. well worth reading, and I urge you to get it. You won't agree with everything, and I think it's all the more important because Naisbitt does not come from our perspective. He begins with a radically different position. He also deals with the world of banking. He deals specifically with a number of fields, and he asks, what business are banks in? And he says, unless banks reconceptualize what business they are in, they will be out of business. So his book is very important. He also attacks the idea of strategic planning, and he says it is worthless unless there is, first of all, a strategic vision. The book has a lot of good, hard common sense, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's easy reading, can be read in a very short time. Have any comments about it, John? Are you familiar with this book?
No, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. The thought did occur to me, though, a while ago when we were talking about problems with Reverend Schuller and the Chris Cathedral, and then I'll come back to this. One of the things that Jim Griffith, who's an attorney at law, one of the things that he's going to be dealing with at the Conference on the Media and the Arts in October is this very problem, and he's going to attempt to send forth the biblical law with respect to how do we found our efforts in these areas. One of the major problems in Christian art today, for example, is the fact that most Christians seem to feel that somehow their work is sanctified if they set up a non-profit corporation. Mm-hmm. And in reality, what they do is acquire a non-profit mentality, which means that they're guaranteed not to make any money. But I just wanted to mention that in passing. Now, megatrends. The one perspective from the brief excerpts that I've seen from megatrends and heard from it, I think the reason why Naisbitt does not deal with the major religious trend is his starting point. This is an illustration of how a man's starting point blinds him to real factors. In reality, all of the major trends that he talks about in that book have a religious foundation. But he can't see that, given his starting point of presupposition.
Very good.
His book is, in effect, a criticism of effects or results, and not a book that has to deal with causes.
Yes.
With ultimate causes. And it's interesting that it comes out of what really is a member of the opposing camp.
Yes.
And one should make that kind of statement, the kinds of statements that he makes in that book. It's very, very interesting. You mentioned the trends in education. I think we're all aware now of the major blow-up that's occurred in the last few weeks in the major media. The media is suddenly horrified that the public school system is turning out incompetence by the millions. And I've been watching this debate recently, and it's following a trend in all such debates, that the liberal first raises these kinds of issues in the media and then beats his breast for several weeks, and then it's very quickly forgotten.
Yes. And
brushed aside. And in the meanwhile, though, everyone has been firmly convinced of the fact that the system that exists is a failure, and something's going to have to replace it. But I think Megatrends is an important book. I think everybody ought to read it.
Yes.
Particularly when you realize the fact that he comes to these conclusions without any real solid foundation. He doesn't really know what he knows. All he can do is try to report the facts and explain them. And I think it's important from that perspective. Very important.
Well, one reason why the prosecution of Christian schools is underway is because it's the only way they can hope to deal with the competition. The public schools cannot match them. So they are going to try to eliminate them.
Well, I think it's evident who the leaders of the United States are going to be in 20 years. They're going to be those out of the Christian schools.
Yes.
And the reasons why are really very, very basic. Number one, they're by the time they're in the 7th and 8th grades, depending on, it varies, of course, from school to school, but by the time they're in the 7th and 8th grades, they're already thinking at the intellectual level of a high school graduate in most public school systems. And by the time they finish high school, they have the equivalent of a junior college education. And with that kind of a foundation going into a university, as long as the faith stays strong, they can really interpret the data very, very effectively, become much better interpreters of facts and data. And I think just the natural outworking of ideas having consequences is going to produce a bifurcation, or a split rather, in between the humanist educated and Christian educated men of the future. That there's going to be two very distinctly different camps of thought, and that you're going to find all of a sudden that the majority of the leadership positions are held by Christians, simply because of their fundamental competence. And that's going to create some very interesting problems in the future.
Yes. Well, John, you were the other night at our Chalcedon Christian School open house. This was the first time you were there.
Yes, indeed.
Do you want to comment on what the school is like?
Well, I mean, I won't go into it in too much detail, but one person who was a guest there, whose children were not in Chalcedon School, but whose children will be in Chalcedon School come September, a gentleman walked up to me, and we were standing there talking, and he said, and he said it almost under his breath, like he was afraid some of his friends there might hear him, who had their kids in other schools. But he was making reference to another private school, and he said the difference between that school and Chalcedon is the difference between the USFL and the NFL. And I thought, very interesting observation. I think I was incredibly, I was impressed to an extent that I have not recently been impressed by an educational effort. And I say that with a great deal of thought, because I've been very concerned with my own children's intellectual development. And when I saw the results begin to happen, when I could see my daughter, for example, compose a work of poetry, in the 6th grade that rivals 75 to 80% of the stuff that appears in published magazines, it just struck me how incredibly incompetent the humanist perspective is, and how confident even the simplest Christian foundation can be, and what the kinds of consequences it can produce in children in thinking.
Well, John, you should have heard what the parents with children in public schools said about the contrast. Well, when the 4th graders were going over their math work, doing the computations mentally, multiply 223 by 6 and divide it by 4, and then subtract so much and add so much and multiply so much, and what is the result? All of that in their head. I looked at you and Otto, and I knew that all three of us had flunked before we got halfway through the problem.
One woman standing there with a baby in one arm and a little 3-year-old on her hanging onto her skirt. She was, every time they must have done 12, 15, 18 of these continuous strings of calculations in their heads. And this is in the 3rd grade room, not the 4th grade. This is in the 3rd grade room when I saw it. And she was standing there, and I could just see her lips going as she was trying to follow along with the calculations, And then when it was all over, why, she said she gave an answer which was not the correct answer, and she did that about 5 or 6 times in a row, And she says, finally, she just says to herself as the class came to an end, I just flunked the 3rd grade. And she meant it. It wasn't something she was just saying as a joke. She said, I just flunked the 3rd grade, and I'm a 24-year-old woman.
Well, I was delighted at the ease with which the 4th graders not only prayed the Agnus Dei in Latin, but conjugated and declined and translated from Latin to English, from English to Latin, and so on.
There's the foundation for future scholarship right
Yeah.
there, because one does not go back beyond the 18th century with any degree of expertise in interpreting documents and history and government and everything else if you don't read Latin. And we've got, I mean, let's face it, the first 1,700 years of our Christian history since the Lord's Advent has been done in Latin and Greek.
Yes.
And without that, you simply don't understand the foundation of modern languages. You don't understand the foundation of the Western world in terms of being able to read the documents. You have to rely on someone else's interpretation of the document always, and that really gets you in trouble.
You know, we had a very wonderful, a very remarkable person there as a guest that evening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to meet her. Some other time you'll have to. Sister Mary Audrey.
Yes.
She is 79 years old. She has taught in parochial schools for 59 years in 4 continents: Asia, South America, North America, and Europe. And she's not retired yet, although she has retired from the teaching end of her vocation. You'll see her walking around Angels Camp almost any day of the year. She has had 2 serious heart attacks since the 1st of January, but she is out calling every day on the sick and the shut-ins in the community. She's a very radiant woman full of grace.
Remarkable lady.
Yes, she is. Well, now I want to go on very briefly to another book which I do not recommend at all. It's a book by W.D. Payden, P as in Paul, A-D-E-N, Tennyson in Egypt, a study of the imagery in his earlier work. Now, I cite this as a horrible example of what so much of modern scholarship and modern thought is about. Because what this book does is to go to a book written by Charles and Alfred Tennyson, the brothers, when they were 18 and 17 years of age, respectively, which was published in 1827. Now, those poems were of indifferent quality. They're not worthy of attention or reprinting, except as a curiosity of something produced by a great poet in his youth. However, Payden's interest in it is more than literary, even though he is a literary scholar. His interest is psychoanalytic. He says that literary scholarship must look at anything that is written in terms of certain concepts. The first is the concept of repression. The second, substitution, so that repressed emotions find a substitute expression. And the third, ambiguity. Now, in terms of this, he can take the simple meaning of rather indifferent poetry, fairly well written, but nothing remarkable, and have it mean all kinds of things about the hidden life of the Tennyson brothers in their youth. Well, of course, the premise here is that of modern psychoanalysis, psychology, and psychiatry. From Freud on especially, people have gone to the unconscious mind, previously called the subconscious, which I feel is still the better term, and read the mind of man in terms of the unconscious. Well, this kind of interpretation is clearly invalid, but it governs our society. It rests on Freud's book on the interpretation of dreams, Dreams somehow were a code that would tell us what the man really thought, so that we were to be understood through our unconscious expressions. Is this true? Modern art is governed by this premise. A great deal of criminology is governed by it through psychiatric court testimony. Art, literary and non-literary, is very strongly under the influence of this kind of thing. A great deal of pastoral counseling, unfortunately, is governed by this. It has had a powerful impact on education, and so on and on. And yet the surprising fact is that it is invalid. It's been demonstrated to be, but it fits in so closely and thoroughly with the theory of evolution that it is accepted. Very early, however, psychoanalysts found that when they were studying the dreams of their patients, that their patients' dreams were fitting their theories perfectly, and they found very quickly that the patients were dreaming in terms of what the psychoanalyst expected. In other words, the mind of the patient was creating the dreams that the mind of the psychiatrist felt would fit his theory. As a result, the more responsible psychoanalyst dropped dream analysis. And so they're trying to get to the subconscious through other types of analysis. But in all of these, the mind of the analyzed is governed by the mind of the analyst and controls whatever that subconscious expression is. And the result is that instead of the unconscious or a subconscious governing the conscious mind, what the history of psychoanalysis has demonstrated is that the conscious mind controls and creates what comes out of the unconscious.
Just one quick comment about Payton's interpreting all of the various kinds of meaning in some of the simplest phrases. In the art world, we call that the Puff the Magic Dragon syndrome. Because you might remember for years there was the uproar over the supposed hidden meanings in the song Puff the Magic Dragon that Peter, Paul, and Mary did so successfully. And it didn't make any difference that all three of them time and again refuted all those charges, that they had no such hidden meanings, that it was the construct of the social critics and the psychologists, and not in the song itself. And so a whole concept developed of reading hidden meanings where there are none, and a lot of us call that the Puff the Magic Dragon syndrome.
Yes.
And that's what Payton suffers from.
Well, a lot of the rock lyrics have been composed deliberately to put in a supposedly unconscious meaning. Yes. So they are now manufacturing the underground meaning deliberately.
Oh, it shows you just how competent psychiatry is.
Yes. So even though they have the evidence staring them in the face again and again that the conscious mind controls it, they insist on seeing the unconscious as determinative. I'm going to go into the reason for that tomorrow morning, by the way, Sunday morning, as I deal with the prophetic man, because there are some important implications that I don't want to take time to develop here. But we have a peculiar situation today in the world in that man is turning everything on its head. And the result is we don't know our own selves. We don't know our world, because we're following the kind of interpretation of things that Payton does. We see a hidden meaning in everything when the obvious meaning escapes us. And so we are stumbling around like blind men, and we are creating the sickest literature perhaps in all of history, and the sickest art, because we've foisted a Darwinistic perspective and everything has to come up out of the unconscious and out of the primordial. The doctrine of evolution has in many, many respects had a very sinister influence on the history of man.
I think that the whole theory of evolution, the survival of the fittest, and this comes back to megatrends as well as George Will, and I think that one of the major outcomes of the whole theory of evolution, as it was taught and accepted in the 1860s and 70s and 80s, was the fact that the wealthy and the businessman doesn't have to do anything for anyone else, and out of that it laid, I think, the foundation for the sweatshops, so-called sweatshops, and many of which were not sweatshops, but the examples which were exploited well beyond by the social do-gooders. And I think that created that the theory of evolution is perhaps responsible for more evil and death and suffering and depravity in the Western world than any other single concept that I could name. We could go into a lot of things about, but I think the one concept which is the logical expression of humanism at work and man being God is the whole theory of evolution concept. And one of the things I take issue with very strongly is Carl Sagan's Cosmos. I thought it was very interesting. They've been rerunning Carl Sagan's view of the cosmos on all the PBS stations and everywhere else now for the last 2 years. And here's this man who's an object of ridicule in the scientific community, who is incapable of sustaining a rational argument, who sits there in this throne room, of a set construction, and sits in wonder before the universe, and at the same time takes his shots at Christian religion.
Yes.
And it is evident that the theory of evolution is being propagated as a fundamental constituent of a religious worldview.
Yes.
In art and in psychology and everywhere else. And that's why I think that it's probably the single most devastating one concept that modern man has to deal with.
I agree emphatically. Well, our time is up. It's been good to be with you again, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks, in between which time we'll have our conference in Seattle. I'll be in Australia, in Nebraska, and in Florida. Until then, God bless you.